Hello everyone and welcome to the video. Today we talk about Diddy. I am a psychologist and I will look at Diddy's life, previous allegations and the current allegations. And then I will give you my take as a psychologist. This both re Diddy's lifestyle and regarding a possible personality profile. So let's get into it. First, a bit of background. Who is Sean Combs? Well, he grew up in Harlem in the 1970s. His father died early, and his mother moved both herself and her son out of that area into a much better part of town. And there, Sean went to a much better school and became a straight A student. In the end, he was actually good enough to enroll at Howard University. While at Howard, we don't actually know much about his studies there and how he performed as a student. But what we do know is that he showed a fair bit of entrepreneurial spirit. He joined a fraternity and threw parties, and he also started a cab service that would take home drunk students after parties. When he was off campus, he hung out with a man called Heavy D. He was a hip hop artist and signed to Uptown Records. Heavy D took Sean to Uptown Records, where Sean Combs met one Andre Harrell, the man who was running Uptown Records. And Andre took a liking to Sean and hired him as an intern. There have, for the longest time, actually been rumors that Andre took a particular liking to Sean. I will leave it at that, a particular liking, but bear this in mind as this may become relevant later on in the video. Okay, so Andre Harrell was running Uptown and he hired Sean as an intern. But of course, a record label is a very expensive operation and Andre couldn't finance that by himself. He had financial backing by one Clive Davis. So Sean was working at Uptown Records, but he had not completed his degree. For a while, he would travel between the university and Uptown Records to be both a student and an intern. But that was not an ideal situation, of course. So before long, Sean Combs actually quit his degree and at only 20 years old became a full-time employee at Uptown. But he didn't just become a full-time employee. Andre made him the vice president at Uptown. So in a very short period of time, Sean went from being a student, being introduced to Uptown Records, then being a part-time intern to the vice president of a record label. Andre and Sean must have really had a great relationship. Sean worked for Andre as the vice president of Uptown for a few years, but then when Sean was 23, he was fired. This could have been the end for Sean's career in the music industry, but it wasn't. Instead, a complex power game between Andre, Clive, and Sean developed. Initially, the social relationships probably looked something like this. Andre had a great relationship with Clive and also had a great relationship with Sean. But somehow, over the course of time, Sean developed a great relationship with Clive. This was to the gravest disadvantage of Andre. So the whole social constellation probably looked more like this then. Clive and Sean got along, but neither got along with Andre. The new constellation meant that Sean founded his own record label, Bad Boy Entertainment. And that wasn't enough. Andre's artists were actually released from Uptown and signed to Bad Boy. So whatever happened behind the scenes, what we do know is that Andre fired Diddy and then Diddy basically took everything from Andre. It was at that point that Andre began calling himself Puff Daddy. His mother had described him as huffing and puffing whenever he was angry or annoyed as a child. And so he actually made that part of his moniker. Interestingly enough, the Bad Boy logo shows a huffing and puffing toddler. The boy wears military boots, has an aggressive facial expression, and raises his fist. It looks like he's charging at you. That's gotta be Puff Daddy's idea of a bad boy, I suppose. Now Puff Daddy didn't just take over Uptown artists, he also signed his own artists. Some of the bigger names are Biggie Smalls and Craig Mack, to name just the two that are relevant for this story. I could name others, but this video would get too long. In 1992, Usher, a 12 or 13-year-old at the time, was sent to live with Puff Daddy to prepare him for stardom. It was a living situation that was later described as Puffy's Flavor Camp, and that takes us to the next chapter. The allegations. So a really rather young Usher lived with Puffy. That lasted for about a year. In interviews given much later, Usher said that he saw the lifestyle, as he put it. We can only guess what he meant, but a later chapter in this video may give you an idea or two. On being asked if he would ever send his own children to live with Puffy, Usher laughed and said, absolutely not. In 1995, Craig Mack steered into difficulty with Puffy. Puff Daddy asked Craig Mack to fire a manager, I believe it was. Craig Mack was not prepared to do so. The situation became more and more contentious, and Craig Mack said in an interview many years later that he began carrying a gun in those days. It appears that he was very afraid. Then there was a competition with Death Row Records. To cut a very long story short, as part of the power struggle between the labels, Death Row artist Tupac Shakur was shot dead. A while later, Puffy's artist Biggie Smalls also died. To this day, we don't really know what happened around those years. What we do know is that last year, in 2023, a man named Dwayne Davis, aka Keefe D, was arrested for his alleged involvement in the murder of Tupac Shakur. Keefe D said apparently that it was a murder for hire, and he also claimed that Puff Daddy had offered to pay. If these are just stories of a man that wants attention, Keefe D, or if there is something to that, I cannot tell you, but I think we will probably find out at some point in the future. This takes us to the next chapter, chapter 3, the women. The first woman we will talk about is Kim Porter. Puffy dated her for years and years, and there are lots of allegations around the relationship. Puffy is said to have been manipulative, controlling, and domineering. There were more allegations as to what happened after they finally split. Puffy is said to have stalked her, and apparently he tapped her phone, and he is said to have gone ballistic over her talking to another man. There are then further allegations about Puffy having gotten violent with that man, and also allegations of domestic violence towards Kim Porter, as well as talk of a broken nose. The next woman is called Gina. In a later interview, she described him as nice and charming for about 2 to 4 months. This honeymoon period then was followed by about 5 years of what she described as mental, emotional, and physical abuse. She described Puffy as belittling towards her. On one occasion, she says, he stomped on her stomach and punched her in the head. While he was punching her, he apparently was carefully avoiding hitting her face. So he's punching her specifically in the side of her skull, she says. The last woman we will talk about is Cassie. She split up from Puffy and recently filed a lawsuit against him. There was a 30-page paper that details her allegations, and this is how we know a lot about what she says happened to her over the course of a decade-long relationship. In the court document, she accused Puffy of a pattern of abuse that involved sex trafficking, human trafficking, sexual battery, sexual assault, as well as gender-motivated violence. To give you an idea of what specifically she said, among the serious allegations is that Diddy sex trafficked her to male prostitutes while he watched for sexual pleasure. The suit also states that Diddy told her that it would turn him on to see her have intercourse with other men. The lawsuit also claims that she was directed to cover herself with oil and have intercourse with multiple men, sometimes in masks and costumes. And apparently Puffy hired a man and brought him to his home in Los Angeles to engage in sex acts with Cassie. Puffy actually, well, she says that he directed her to perform specific acts with the man while he watched. And I better not say what he did then. She claimed that Diddy once got drunk during a sex party, what he refers to as a freak-off, and punched her in the face that left her with a black eye. And at public events, Puffy likes to be armed. Puffy made her carry his gun in her purse, something that she interpreted as an attempt to intimidate her. Just one day after filing the suit, Puffy and her settled out of court for an undisclosed sum of money, so we will never really know. But these are just a few things that she alleges. An interesting addition to the Cassie story is that what happened after she split from Puffy. Just like Kim Porter, she started talking to another man, and just like in Kim Porter's case, Puffy did not take well to that. Cassie talked to an artist called Kid Cudi, and Puffy apparently threatened Cudi with blowing up his car. And then a few weeks later, exactly that happened. Cudi's car went up in flames. Which takes us to the next chapter, chapter 4, the current allegations. This time round, there is a 100-page court filing, and I've read most of those 100 pages, and in the next chapter, I will tell you what's in those pages. The vast majority of the accusations against Puffy draw on the statements of an artist named Mr. Jones. So Mr. Jones lived with Puffy for about a year. He's a producer and an artist, and he was there under an implied work for hire agreement. Specifically, he had been recruited to work on the recently released Love album. He says he was to be paid $20,000 per song. In a court document, it says he never was paid, which is probably why he told us so much about what happens when you live with Puff Daddy. Puffy approached Mr. Jones in a sexual way. Apparently, Puffy groped Mr. Jones's backside. And not just once. For example, Mr. Jones was required to work in Diddy's bathroom while Diddy walked around naked, took a shower, and touched Mr. Jones. That was not all. Diddy's acquainted with Cuba Gooding Jr., a Hollywood actor and a man that has been accused of sexual assault and rape by multiple people in recent years. He settled those court cases twice, I think. Mr. Jones says that Puffy practically passed him on to Cuba for sexual assault. In an apparent attempt to make all this seem normal, Mr. Jones was sent a video of two men having intercourse. He was told it was the industry standard. Next to all the men groping and sleeping with each other, there were also women around. Mr. Jones says he was sexually assaulted by a woman in a bathroom while Puffy and other men laughed outside. As if men groping you, sending you videos of intercourse, passing you on to other men and women assaulting you wasn't enough, there were also the sex parties, so-called freak-offs. Those involved both men and women, many of them sex workers, and Mr. Jones alleges also minors. So what happened at those freak-offs was that people were required to take drugs. Some people were given drugs without their knowledge. This apparently happened to minors too. Specifically, Mr. Jones says, at Puffy's request. Mr. Jones says that he sometimes found himself wandering the house naked without a meaningful recollection of what had happened to him. He also says he once found himself waking up next to sex workers. All of this is in the documents filed. Then something else happened. In September of 2022, Puffy got into a verbal altercation that resulted in someone getting shot in a bathroom. Mr. Jones says. Someone was shot in the torso and in the hip or leg. After the shot rang out, Puffy and one of his sons left that bathroom, Mr. Jones says. According to the document, Puffy apparently told people what to tell to the police, i.e. that Puffy had nothing to do with the shooting. The police came and stayed for quite a while, but no one was arrested for the shooting. So why on earth, if you were hired to work at an artist, would you stay in a place where all of this goes on and you do not feel okay? Well, Mr. Jones alleges that Puffy used a mix of charm, promises, and threats to keep him there. So how did that work? First of all, Mr. Jones is neither famous nor wealthy. Working as an artist and producer for one of the biggest stars in the industry is a great step in anyone's career. Few people would give that up lightly. Also, Puffy promised to introduce him to industry figures and an award for Producer of the Year. That would be awesome for an artist. I would imagine that for Mr. Jones, there was also the issue of needing to get paid the agreed $20,000 per song. No small amount for an upcoming artist. You wouldn't just walk out on that. Also, the promises were aplenty apparently. For example, Puffy at one point promised Mr. Jones a house worth $20 million. Next to all the promises, Puffy also used threats. Sometimes those were direct threats, like when he threatened to rip Mr. Jones's face off and showed him his gun collection. Puffy told him that he had gotten away with shooting people. Other threats were indirect. Puffy told Mr. Jones about his excellent relationship with the police department and about a member of staff that can make both problems and people disappear. This sounds like Mr. Jones found himself in an overwhelming environment, an environment that left him confused. Confused somewhere between the joy of working there and the hope of all the promises coming true, and the fear of very serious violence. And on top, the despair at the repeated humiliation he was subjected to. Hindsight is 2020 though, and so it is easy for all of us now to say that he was being stupid for staying there. It is not like the door was locked, he could have walked out at any moment. I think Mr. Jones fell into a mental trap that we call the sunken cost fallacy. We all get into situations that seem great, but that turn out to be everything but. Then we tell ourselves that we can't pull out, we already invested so much. Time, effort, or money. Instead, we better stick it out. It will get better, and the longer you do it, the more you have invested, and the harder it becomes to cut your losses and leave. I don't know Mr. Jones, so I can't say what he was thinking at the time, but the sunken cost fallacy is really a very common mental trap. Mr. Jones says that by the end of his time at Puffy's, He then wasn't even paid. Even an attempt at negotiating a reduced rate with Puffy failed, and so Mr. Jones left. He says that a number of things happened after he left. Someone that knows Mr. Jones was approached and offered money for information on him. The person who was approached expressed fear about the incident, according to Mr. Jones. Then Mr. Jones's own 8-year-old daughter was spoken to until she cried. Apparently, somebody had called the house phone. All of this was then followed by harassing text messages. And so this is what Mr. Jones says happened to him. And now we take a look at what other things we have learned about Puffy's Flavor Camp. Apparently, there are cameras in every room at Puffy's house. So if Mr. Jones's stories of drugs, freak-offs, and homosexual relationships are true, then there should be a lot of footage of a lot of people in very compromising positions. Over the years, lots of celebrities, industry figures, as well as athletes and apparently politicians visited Puffy's house. We know from the document that was filed with the courts that Mr. Jones says that other musicians and producers were forced into having sexual intercourse with sex workers at the house. If all of this is true and Puffy has footage of everyone, then this could be the reason for why all of this went on for such a long time. Footage like that would make Puffy a very powerful man. In the court document, they actually compare him to Jeffrey Epstein, another man with a lot of footage of a lot of people in compromising positions, or so the story goes. So, piecing together a large number of incidents and allegations then paints an interesting lifestyle picture. First of all, there are the Machiavellian business dealings. Puffy was really very domineering with Mack, and then there are the stories around Tupac and Biggie, but at the moment we don't know much about his involvement or if he even was involved. What we do know, though, is that Mr. Jones says he wasn't paid. And then there are other allegations. First of all, the allegation of that he records people in his house, preferably when they've taken drugs and are doing things they wouldn't want other people to know about. Then there are the allegations of using charm, promises, and direct threats against, for instance, Mr. Jones, the promises of industry contacts, awards, and monies, but also threatening to rip Mr. Jones's face off. And then there are the apparent indirect threats, the stories about influential members of staff that can make people disappear, and connections with the police department. And then there are the stories about guns. Showing off guns, boasting that he has gotten away with shooting people, making a girlfriend carry his gun to scare her, and of course an actual shooting in the bathroom. All of this seems rather Machiavellian. And of course then there are lots of other allegations. Allegations of violence, domestic violence, stalking, and intimidation. We've looked at stories about domestic violence and stalking with regards to Kim and Cassie. With Gina we have seen stories of domestic violence. Then there are the allegations of violence against men that date his ex-girlfriends or that even only speak to them on the phone, and rumors of violence against a man that Kim spoke to and Kid Cudi's car being blown up when he spoke to Cassie. And then we have Mr. Jones's allegation of stalking and intimidation, the story of Mr. Jones's 8-year-old daughter being spoken to until she cried, and harassing text messages being sent. And then the last set of allegations, the sexual stuff. If these stories are to be believed, then Puffy has many sexual interests and preferences. First, Usher said that he lived at the Flavor Camp, although he's never told us what happened there, what he was exposed to specifically. But then there are the allegations of repeated gropings of Mr. Jones, the sending of a video of intercourse between men, and then there are the many freak-offs allegedly involving underage girls. And then there are the stories of coercion and humiliation of Cassie, the girlfriend, and Cassie's allegation of Puffy making her take drugs and engage in sexual interactions with other men so that Puffy could watch. So now let's move on to personality. Many people use the 5-factor model of personality. I prefer the Hexaco model. It is basically Big Five, but it involves an additional 6th scale that is actually very interesting. Now, of course, I do not know Puffy. I've never spoken to him, and many of the things discussed in this video remain allegations. So I will discuss his personality as speculation, as if all the things people say about him were true. At the top right-hand corner you see emotionality. Looking at a man that founded a business and took it to a billion-dollar company, I would not consider him emotional or fearful at all. Rather, it looks like he is tough and a self-assured character. Next up is extroversion. It describes how confident you are in social interactions. Well, a man that throws so many parties and knows virtually everyone in the industry is no wallflower. He probably is very extroverted. Agreeableness describes how patient, gentle, and forgiving you are with others. Many people think agreeableness is great, but that actually depends on the context. If you work in a social profession, agreeableness is great because you have to be gentle and forgiving. If, however, you run a multi-billion-dollar business, you shouldn't be agreeable. Agreeable people are nice, and they are also nice to people they negotiate with, and so they often lose out. Being nice to people isn't always a good thing. So a man that started a record label by winning a power struggle and then took his label to a billion-dollar business didn't worry about people liking him much in the process. An agreeable man wouldn't have gotten this far. Conscientiousness describes your attention to detail, how meticulous you are when you are working. Again, he founded a label and then took it to $1 billion. If he weren't on top of all the monies, the artists, the contracts, and everything else, he would not have been that successful. He can't be a lax character and hope to become as successful and wealthy as Puffy, so he's probably very conscientious. Openness describes your love for the arts. Do you appreciate art? Are you creative yourself? And do you like unconventionality? Well, Puffy's an artist. He surrounds himself with artists. He creates songs, rhymes, and beats. He is probably very creative. Last, we look at honesty and humility. The opposites to that would be lies and greed. If it is true that Mr. Jones was not paid, and if just some of the other allegations are true, I would not consider Puffy a particularly fair or honest man. Regarding humility versus greed, I refer back to $1 billion company. You do not become a billionaire by being so humble that you give away your last shirt. So I would say Puffy has a rather low score on the scale. So all in all, I would say Puffy is not an emotional, agreeable, or humble type, but he is extroverted, very conscientious, and probably highly creative. I close this video with a 15 seconds clip of Puffy himself. He describes the founding of Bad Boy and his thinking behind it. The video is on his website, so we can record it as part of his advertising. Let me know in the comment section on YouTube if you think the man in this video could have done all the things they accuse him of.
Bad Boy Entertainment. I named it Bad Boy because I wanted to go against the grain. Anytime you go against the grain, they consider you like kind of bad. Nothing negative, nothing like hardcore. Just, I didn't want to be regular. I didn't want to just make records. I didn't want to just make money. I wanted to make history. And that's all it's ever been about for me, making history. And making music that's timeless. Music that's going to be around when I'm not here, when my kids ain't here. Music that is that good. And having artists and videos and things that, you know, really affect way of life in a positive way. Affect style, fashion, music. Bad Boy.